with a lot of organizations, we create a benchmark. All right. So we can look at as many as 49 different characteristics of an individual. And then we have assessments to measure somebody on those different characteristics. And then we have a report that looks at the distance or the gap between the person that you're looking at and the ideal characteristic or profile. All right. So that's what fit is about. It's about making sure that somebody is in the right position. Collins has this metaphor and that a lot of people use regarding the bus. All right. So are they on the right seat on the bus? Well, what's important is you have to identify which seat they belong in. And that's where the benchmark comes in, number one. And number two, you want to make sure that the bus is going in the right direction. People forget to think about that. So you need to think about, do you have the people in your organization that are going to help you get in the direction that you want to go?
Hey, what's up, Masters? Welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery podcast. And today we have a special treat for you guys. We have Dr. Michael, or Dr. A is what he calls himself, but Dr. Abelson. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, David. How are you?
I'm doing really good. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I know I told you when we went through the certification, I used to teach this, we did your disc. It was a different version. 20 years ago when I first got in, well, not quite 20, probably like 17 years ago, about 3 years into real estate, I was teaching this at my old company, Keller Williams, for the offices and for the agents. So it's really cool to kind of go full circle and now be here on a podcast with you because they were using your disc back then. So man, it's an honor to have you here.
Well, I thank you, David. I'm looking forward to our conversation too. I always like doing these podcasts. It's always fun, and it was great having an opportunity to meet you on the success coaching certification program. So I'm looking forward to our time together today as well.
Absolutely. So a little bit about you. You're the CEO and president of Abelson Group, specializes in assisting clients to maximize human resources via systems and processes. You help develop leaders, build enhanced team effectiveness, identify, procure staff, matching talents with organizational needs, and retaining and realigning, staff and just people and talent. And that's really what this is all about. It really just comes down to understanding behavior and just aligning yourself in with the right people. Is that accurate? Or what I know there's a lot more to it, but why don't you fill in some of those gaps? Like, why is DISC important?
Well, it's always important to understand people that you're going to be interacting with. And a lot of our clients use us for hiring as well, because in the hiring process, it's crucial that you really know what you're getting into. It's a lot of times it's like a marriage, so you want to make sure you're in there with the right person. So the assessments are excellent for that. And there are over 40 different discs out there. I haven't created this disc, so we can use any of them. There are hundreds of assessments out there, but our clients find ours to be very, very accurate, typically over 90% accurate. And they find to be very useful because we look at behaviors, which is the DISC. We look at motives. We look at leadership characteristics. We measure 25 of those, and we look at emotional intelligence. We look at stress. We look at teams and individuals. So it's a lot of great information. And it really helps in a lot of different dimensions. I just finished, as I was sharing with you earlier, I just finished working with a large construction company, looking at their leadership, their 8-person leadership team. And we spent a day and a half on looking at who they are. And then we spent a half a day working together regarding the team. So there's all kinds of neat things that can be done and that we do with people that we work with.
One of the things you said too, and I want to get into motivation as well, because that was one of my biggest takeaways from the certification, is when we were teaching the DISC back in the day, we weren't really focusing as much on the motivation. It was more just like, is this a match? Are you a match for the specific job? And we didn't necessarily get too much into motivation, which I love. I love that. And I want to talk about that. But you mentioned, people using the DISC when they're hiring somebody or they're bringing somebody on. Why don't more people do that?
Because a lot of people just don't like to have the expense, or they have their own way of interviewing and interacting with people. It's interesting if you look at the research, and I spent a lot of time on research at a former life. But if you look at the research, most of the research demonstrates that interviews are one of the most inefficient and ineffective ways of determining whether to hire somebody. But that's what everybody uses. So the value of using an assessment, and you don't have to use our assessment. There's so many of them out there, but you need to make sure that they are a couple things, that they're accurate, they're consistent, and they're compliant with equal employment opportunity law if you're going to be using them for hiring. Ours is, most are not. So if you're using an assessment or about to use one for hiring, make sure you ask that question. But it really gives you tremendous insight into what the person is like. And we recommend using it as part of your structured interview, because once you verify that it's accurate, you can start asking questions that the report itself suggests you should ask to really get a better handle on a person. It's not just about the report, it's about using it as part of your interviewing process so you can get really deeper into what the person is like.
So I know from experience in the past, I made a lot of bad hires, and I didn't, like you said, I didn't necessarily use the disc because maybe the expense or the time. I mean, it's time. It is a time investment as well. And I think sometimes we hire, at least I did. I know I hired out of pain. Like, oh my God, I need to get someone right away. I don't have this time to bring them through this process. But whenever I did, my hire was always a lot better. In the end, I wouldn't hire somebody without going through a process. But do you know, like, what percentage of I'm trying to think of the best way to ask a question. Like, what percentage of, if you looked at two, like hiring somebody without using the DISC process versus hiring somebody with the DISC process, what is the percentage of success if you compare the two?
The percentage of success goes ways up. If you just use our DISC, right, the percent is about 82%. If you use our DISC and motives, the percent goes up further in the 80s. If you're looking at hiring somebody for a leadership position and you use our DISC on our motives and the assessment that we use for leadership, you're in the 90%.
And that's success rate.
Yes. Yes. So it's really, really helpful. And one of the problems that we find is that people don't know how to use the report. So we actually have about 30 short videos that shows people how to use the report, and all of our clients who have accounts with us, they have free access to these 30 brief videos. We call it A-Learn, and we have 3 levels of A-Learn, and the silver level is free to anybody who uses us. And again, and most of the videos are anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 minutes. So they're really brief videos.
And I might have shortchanged you too when I did your bio, because you've been doing this for how long? Over what, 20, 25 years you've been?
I've been using the DISC for over 25 years. I've been using psychological assessments for over 45 years. I actually have a master's in clinical psychology, was a practicing clinician for a little while, as well as an MBA and PhD in business. So I was using all kinds of psychological assessments. Then for clinical purposes, we don't use the DISC for clinical purposes, and I'm not a clinical psychologist and can't call myself one. But we use these assessments for over a dozen different purposes within organizations, which is a cool aspect about it, because if you buy the assessment once, you can use it for all these different dozen ways, and it doesn't cost you any more because you've already bought the assessment.
So what would you say what would you say is probably you're seeing is the biggest mistake when it does come to hiring somebody?
People hire people that they like. All right. When you hire somebody that just because you like them and there is a connection, within a couple months, you might not like them anymore, but now you're stuck with them. So it's really important. I mean, likability is important. Fitting in the culture is very important, but it's not the most important. What you need to do is you need to make sure that they are a good fit with the job behaviorally, and I love your comment regarding the motives, because the motives are very important, because we look at either 6 or 12. We have 2 different models, but in either model, only one of the motives has anything to do with money, which makes it so cost effective and so useful, because you can motivate people without having to pay them anymore in most cases. So it's really helpful, to do that. so again, what you want to do is, likability is fine. Fit is much more important. That they're going to fit into the culture is important. There's actually a page in our DISC assessment that is their ideal environment. So you can look at that and get that in the conversation. But make sure they've got the right tasks and the right skills, and make sure that they're a good fit. And the likability is good, but it shouldn't be the most important thing.
Yeah, something I learned years ago is it's kind of like dating, right? Everybody is on
Yeah.
their best behavior when they're in
Yeah.
an interview, and they only come with the best stuff, right? If you give
Right.
references, you're giving the best references. You're not giving the bad
One of
references.
the industries we work with is healthcare, and it's interesting for physicians. Physicians are used to making decisions very quickly, and when people are feeling terrible, they come and they tell you the truth. They tell you how they're feeling to the extent to which they're aware of it. And what I find is a lot of physicians think that they can assess somebody for hiring purposes in the same 10 or 15 minutes that it takes them to assess what the problem is physically. Well, the truth of the matter is, people don't necessarily tell people the truth during the interview process, number one. And number two, a lot of times they don't even know a lot about themselves, or as much as they should know about themselves for the hiring process. That's one of the reasons why assessments, whichever one you're using, is so important, because it gives you insight as to what additional questions to ask and the extent to which they will be a fit in your organization.
Yeah, you mentioned that. You mentioned the word fit a couple times, and I'm gonna go back to that and find out why that's so important. I also we're live on Clubhouse right now, and I want to let people know on Clubhouse, if you can share the room, it'll help us grow. That's why you keep seeing me look down at the phone here. But if you guys share the room, also if people want to come up and ask a question, just raise your hand, and we'll get you up, and you can ask Dr. Abelson a question. So when you talk about fit, what are you referring to?
Well, one of the things that we do is we with a lot of organizations, we create a benchmark. All right. So we can look at as many as 49 different characteristics of an individual. And then we have assessments to measure somebody on those different characteristics. And then we have a report that looks at the distance or the gap between the person that you're looking at and the ideal characteristic or profile. All right. So that's what fit is about. It's about making sure that somebody is in the right position. Collins has this metaphor, and that a lot of people use regarding the bus. All right. So are they on the right seat on the bus? Well, what's important is you have to identify which seat they belong in. And that's where the benchmark comes in, number one. And number two, you want to make sure that the bus is going in the right direction. People forget to think about that. So you need to think about, do you have the people in your organization that are going to help you get in the direction that you want to go? Right. And your ability to restructure that. And we help organizations do that. And we use assessments to do that as well, because our environment is changing so quickly anymore that your needs change. And it's important to realize, well, maybe I need to shift people from this position to another position because the position has changed or the needs have changed. And this person has those skills. Cool. Let's put them in there. But you need to really understand those skills. And that's another thing that we help organizations do. And that's realignment of their staff. So they don't have to go out and hire somebody new. If you like somebody and they're really good and they fit in the culture, man, that is manna from heaven. So you want to make sure that you keep that cultural fit, but you also need to make sure that they have the behavioral fit for the particular position or how the job has changed.
And what would you say, from your experience, you've been doing this a long time, what would you say is the biggest reason why people leave companies and leave organizations?
I've done a number of studies on that, right? And about 50% of the time they leave because of their manager or their supervisor. They don't tell you that. They tell you, I'm leaving because of money, or I'm leaving because of personal things. But about 50% of the time they're leaving because the manager isn't effectively managing them, and it isn't a good fit with the manager. And so that's about half the time that they have the reasons that people actually leave organizations.
People leave people, typically, not organizations. We've heard that saying.
That's a great way. That's a great way of putting it. Yes.
And I know myself, I'm guilty of this. I was always a really great salesperson, then I found myself in a place where I had to, I hit a ceiling. So I had to hire people, put them around me to keep growing. But I never studied leadership. I never had to lead people. I was a hot mess, to be honest with you, a disaster. But after a lot of pain, I started, looking at myself. So, it started with just understanding myself, doing a DISC assessment, doing some other assessments that we did back in the day. And how important is it to know yourself first?
It's really crucial, because there's two sides to that interviewing process. There's two sides of whether you're going to stay in an organization or not. All right. It's you and whoever is leading the other side. So you need to be a good leader for yourself. In fact, we have a product that we call the individual personal discovery. And what we do is we give people our 5 primary assessments that look at behaviors, motives, leadership characteristics, emotional intelligence, and how they deal with stress. And then I'll spend 3 hours with them going over their report. And before we actually get into the 3 hours, I give them a list of about 60 things, and they go in and check those things that they really want to look at. And then I'll spend 3 1-hour sessions or 2 1.5-hour sessions. It's up to them, going over the reports and going over and hitting the highlights of the reports. And we find it works really well. There's a lot of people that are in an organization and they're doing well, but they hit a glass ceiling and they don't know why. And that's where understanding yourself really helps, because then you can figure out or have more insight as to why you've hit this glass ceiling, and whether it's a glass ceiling or it's concrete. Okay. And if it's concrete, then you might want to go to another organization. If it's truly a glass ceiling and you understand more about yourself, then it's a lot easier, okay, to break through the glass and get to the next level.
I'm going to back up a little bit, because something you had talked about making sure that not only are they in the right role, but they're on the right seat in the bus, right? And the bus is going in the right direction. But also, what about you as a leader? Like, can't there sometimes be like this huge disconnect between I guess I don't know if I'm asking the question right, but I have to also understand my behavior so I know who I need to put around me, right? Is that accurate? Or
yeah, that is very accurate. Most people, if you know the DISC, most people assume that the leader has to be a D or a DI. Not so. All right. What the key is that the leader is the one, and I have several different leadership trainings, one on charismatic leadership, one on what I call the participatory benevolent dictatorship. And executives love that one, as well as the charismatic one. But leaders are the ones who lead the process. Managers are the ones who lead the content. At least that's my concept and the way I describe it. So it's important that you're leading the process and you're putting people around you that have strengths where you have weaknesses or limitations. So if you are an intense C, which you are very detail oriented or task oriented, and the very cognitive types of individuals, and they operate from the head, you need to have people who are more people oriented. So you need to find them. You need to have people that are more externally and look outside themselves and collect that type of data. And you need to identify them. And that's a C. You don't have to be a D to be an effective leader. The key is you're creating a team and you're putting people around you who have the different behavioral styles, right? And have the type of motives that are important. So you have a culture that works well together. And these are all important aspects in what it is what you're hiring. So you can be a D, you can be an I, you can be an S, you can be a C, you can be any blend of all of those. We measure 384 different behavioral styles. Most of us only measure no more than 24, and most people are this blend. So what you want to do is you want to get people who, again, have strengths where you have limitations, and then delegate to them and then monitor what's going on to make sure they're doing the right thing. We have another program on what to delegate, what not to delegate, and what I talk about there are the 5 things not to delegate, and you should delegate everything else.
Yeah, and it's important too. Like I think you said this on the training, to have a balanced team. Like you want some, like if you're going to run a business, you're going to need a D, an I, an S. You're going to need all the areas, right?
Yes.
And sometimes it's not equal though. Like I think this came up because like in the sales space, you're typically going to have a lot more D's and I's because they're salespeople, right? They're out selling, and you'll have, supportive people on the S and the C side. So it's not completely balanced, but let's talk about that. So how does somebody, let's do like a cheat sheet, like
Sure.
this, like how does somebody know if they're a D?
Well, people that are Ds are typically very competitive. They're very decisive. They like to be doing a lot of different things. They like to be in control of what's happening for themselves, and they like to be in control of other people. Again, when you look at it, they're task oriented and they have an external focus. So they like to interact with people, but they like to be in command.
So if you're on Clubhouse and you feel like you're a D, task focused, in command, competitive, just put in the chat, put D. Now, what about the I now?
The I's are people oriented with an external focus, so they like to talk a lot. They're very interactive, and they're people oriented. And one of the famous things that goes, with them is a stranger is a person I haven't had a chance to befriend yet. Okay, so they're very, very interactive. They're typically loyal. They're very, very optimistic. In a team building or a team meeting, when something just went wrong, what I'll do is I'll go to somebody who's an I to ask their opinion or perception of what's going on, because they typically look at the glass as being half full. All right, so you get that optimism, that loyalty, that interaction aspect.
And give us who's the famous D that you referred to in your training?
There's all kinds of D's out there,
so give us a famous one that everybody would recognize.
Well, if you ever looked at the movie The Devil Wears Prada, okay, the main actress Meryl Streep in that case, okay, is a very, very intense D. Right, she's out there and she's doing all these. She's just in command, and she is so intense, D, that she's insensitive to other people's needs, and she's just very, very task oriented.
And what about an I? So, who's the I?
I actually like to use Oprah as an I, because if you've ever watched Oprah when she was interviewing people, she's just an incredible interviewer. She gets everybody to just open up their life, and talk about all these wonderful, wonderful things, or not so wonderful things about themselves. So they share these secrets that they haven't shared with anybody. And all of a sudden they're sharing it with millions of people over the television, because Oprah knows what button to push to get them to open up.
I love it. Sorry. So let's go to the S now. What are some of the S characteristics? And then let's share.
S's are people oriented with an internal focus. So they operate more from the heart, okay, or from the gut. And they're the ones that are supportive of others. They're the ones that they're hard to read. Their nonverbals will typically hard to read, right? They're family. They're paternalistic or maternalistic type individuals. They're the ones who get things done in organizations, but they don't like to be working on too many things all at the same time. They like to, it's slow and steady wins the course, and wins the race as far as an S, is concerned.
And who's your example?
I like to use Martin Luther King, right? Because here we have a situation where he's leading people, all right? And in the time in the 60s, when we had all this turmoil and we had all this aspect regarding different type of individuals and different, basically, skin color, which I think is a ridiculous way to make judgments on people. But he's leading this movement which needs a lot of change and a lot of awareness, but he's peaceful. It's not this coercive aspect of what's going on. So he's just very, very peaceful and very, very steady and very stable and trying to create a family.
Interesting. And something I also picked up from the training was, I don't know if maybe it was you that said this, like when you go into somebody's, if you're like in somebody's office or somebody's house, and you see a lot of pictures of their family, they're more likely to be an S, as opposed to if you see more pictures of famous people they're with, cars.
D. Okay, the D is going to come out with that. Okay, if it's famous people, the D is going to come out. If it's their friends, all right, that's going to be more the I, all right, because it's more interactive. Now if they
I
can
never
also
thought of
have
that before.
pictures
That's
of
really good.
people who have status, but there is a little difference there.
Yeah, I love it. And what about the C now? The C.
The C are task oriented with an internal focus. So again, they're more cognitive, they're more thoughtful, they're detail oriented, they're quality oriented, they're more cynical. Whereas the I looks at the glass as half full, the C typically looks at the glass as half empty. So they're questioning. And which is great, and you need all three or all four of these different styles, in an organization. Einstein, would be looking at that would be the C. Doctor or Mr. Spock in Star Trek, okay, or Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory, all right, would be very, very classical type C's.
Awesome. All right, I want to jump to motivation. By the way, if anybody in Clubhouse, you guys listen to Path to Mastery podcast. If you missed any of this, you can go to Apple, iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcast. You can download it. It's also on YouTube, Path to Mastery. We're with Dr. Michael Abelson of Abelson Disc Assessment, and he's been doing this a long time. He knows his stuff. And I'll tell you, if you're going to hire somebody, if you're going to go into even like me, I just did this with Mike Wiseman, who is really the first coach I'm bringing on for myself, right? I'm finally bringing on a coach. And so he and I went through not just the disc, but the comparison report.
Oh,
so
cool.
now I'm learning things about him. I'm like, I didn't know this about you. He's like, yeah, absolutely. That's true about me. And I was like, okay, cool. So, so now we're starting to understand each other. So it helps us communicate better.
For the listeners, let me go over the comparison report just quickly. What happens is people take an individual assessment on themselves, whether that be just the disc behaviors or the disc and the motives or the disc and the motives and the leadership. And then what happens is we take the data from their individual report and we put both people on the same page. So for example, let's say, David, we were working together. We would take your report and my report, and it would be how to communicate with David. And on the same page, there'd be bulleted items on how to communicate with Michael. The next page is how not to communicate with David, which is much more important, I think, in a lot of cases. All right, and how not to communicate with Michael. And they're all bulleted items, so we can interact with each other. What is the value I bring to the organization or the team? What is the value that David brings to the organization or the team? And the comparison report is fantastic. And for those people who are coaches, it's great for onboarding, like you're using it, David. I mean, because that way, it's a two-way street. It's great to understand the strengths and the limitations of your coach as well, so you can dive into and use their strengths. Because if you're coaching and you really want to make some changes, you really need to work with your coach, because everybody has their blind spots, even coaches. So it's helpful to know that, and it's very, very helpful.
Well, it's interesting too that I came back in contact with you through that coaching certification, which I've been in the coaching space for 10 years, and nobody's ever talked about the disc assessment. So I think that's super cool that Success is doing that.
Yeah, well, I think you're more that people don't talk about the motives. I mean, a lot of people talk about
true. Yeah, true.
Okay,
well,
it's the motives. So let's get into the motives, because we have two different models. So let me just deal with the six different aspect model. Because the neat thing is, I mean, you have some people who like to have structure. You have some people who like to be the ones who set the structure. So if you're talking to somebody who likes to set the structure and you say to them, I want you to do this, I want you to do that, I want you to do the other thing, they'll probably say to you, sure, whatever you want. And then the instant you leave, they're going to do what they want to do, because they want to set the structure. So it's really important to understand that. And if you have somebody who wants to set the structure, give them constraints and ask them to set the structure within those constraints. So you're both within control of what's going on. So it's important to realize that there's other people who like to have that structure. When I was doing the team building program, not yesterday, but the day before, one of the guys, even though he's one of the 8 people in this leadership group of 40 people, he likes to have structure. He likes to know what the expectations are. He wants to have most of that structure set for him. He wants to know what the standards are. He wants to know what the expectations are. So for somebody like that, if you give that to them, they feel more comfortable. They love the position. And now, if somebody's going to offer them 25% or 33% or 50% raise, they're probably gone. They're probably history. But if somebody's going to give them 5 or 10%, they're going to stick around. And they're not looking for another job because they feel good about what's going on in the culture. They feel appreciated because you're rewarding them in a way that they want to be rewarded. And it's actually rewarding because it makes them feel good. So they have that structure, or they have the freedom to set the structure. There's another set that looks at utilitarian, okay, which deals with efficiency. So these people are into efficiency of time, efficiency of resources, of equipment, machinery, and money. This is the only one that deals with money. So if they're utilitarian, they want you not to waste their time. So don't go in and shoot the breeze for 10 minutes before you get to it. If they're high utilitarian, you walk in their office, you hit the ground running as far as what you want to do or what you want to know from them or what the conversation needs to be about. And then see if they want to talk about what the family is like or what your weekend was like or what yesterday was like. Most times they'll say thanks and they'll dismiss you. Well, get out of their office because they don't want to be spending time with you, no matter how much of an eye you are and you want to spend time with them, because by valuing their time, it's motivational.
And before I think that's a big mistake I see a lot of salespeople make is they feel like they have to do this rapport building and they don't realize that they're dealing with somebody on the other side that just wants, just get this done for me. I don't have time to build rapport. And I think we missed that.
Well, that is a form of rapport, though, David. Okay, that is rapport. You're meeting their needs. You're in rapport with them. Rapport doesn't have to be talking. Rapport is to mirror, right, what's going on in the relationship. So if they're high utilitarian and you walk in, you get your business done, you walk in and say, how much time do we have? All right, this is what I'd like to do. We might even be able to be done a little early. Oh my God, that's better for them because you've just saved them time. You just made time for them.
Yes.
Right? Don't promise you're going to do that because you might need the full amount of time. But if you can end early, is there anything else we need to talk about? No? Cool. Thanks a lot. Should I leave now or is there anything? No, there isn't anything else. Fine. Bye.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, hey, you're still in rapport as you walk out the door because that's what they want.
Such a good point. Yeah. Well, maybe my point, probably a better comment. It wasn't necessarily a question, would be like, I think some salespeople feel like building rapport is, hey, how was your weekend?
There you go.
Football game. Did you, tell me about your family? And some people are just like, right.
Because that's what works for them. All right. And it's important to realize what works for you. Here we go to the blind spots. Okay. It's important to understand what works for you and what makes you feel uncomfortable. Okay. Because what makes you feel uncomfortable might be something that makes the other person very comfortable.
Yeah.
So it's really hard for you to do it, but that's the sign of a really good salesperson. And the reality of it is we're all salespeople. I'm being a salesperson right now, right? Because if you're not buying my ideas, I'm not very good at what I'm doing. All right. So we're all salespeople. So it's important to understand what motivates people. Now, the opposite of this utilitarian is we call it social, but it's a selflessness. It's a giving back to community. It's giving back to other people. It's not a fun social. It's a community social. It's a love for humankind. It's a desire to give to others and a desire to make other people's lives richer and better. Well, there are some people who are very, very motivated for that. Okay. I mean, there might be a lot of people here that are with Keller Williams or were with KW. We were a approved vendor there until Gary decided to do the KPA. We were their disc provider for around 15 years, right? And we still have a large percentage of their market centers and their teams that use us. But Mo Anderson was this one who really created the social aspect and the social culture within Keller Williams. And it was one thing that when Mo set that up, differentiated Keller Williams from the other real estate companies. And there are a certain type of individual who feels that's very important. So for them, Keller Williams felt like home, not because they're making a lot of money, not because they were selling a lot of homes, not because they were getting great training. It was because they felt good and they were giving back to others and they felt this organization cared about them. Okay. And then the other aspect that we haven't covered regarding these motives is there's something called theoretical, and theoreticals like to learn for the sake of learning, right? So they're the ones that are listening to this podcast because you can't give them too much information, right? They're the ones that still want to go to Barnes and Noble or some bookstore instead of just going right to the internet and buying something. They like to peruse and like to feel the book, and they like to really get into it, right? So these are high theoretical. And the last one of the major ones is aesthetic. And aesthetics like that balance in their life. They like events, so they like to go to museums. They might not be artistic themselves, but they do like that type of thing. And these are different ways to motivate people. So if somebody's a high theoretical, give them the opportunity to learn. If they're high theoretical and high individualistic, which are the ones who like to set the rules, they want to train. So give them an audience. As long as they're good at training and they really understand the task that they're training, they'll do it for free because it fulfills them. It makes them feel really good about themselves, and they're helping themselves at the same time they're helping everybody else. So that's one of the aspects of the motives, because it really, really helps people feel engaged and committed and appreciated, no matter which of the motives of it is. And then we also have one that looks at 12. But our assessment measures this. And as you know, David, because we talk about this, we find that at least 90% of the people find our assessment to be 90+% accurate, right? Around 75% of the people find it to be 95% accurate or greater, which is really astounding for any type of psychological assessment. So it's really, really accurate and really, really helpful, and gives people all kinds of great insight. And then, of course, of that, we have training.
All right. So if somebody wants to take the assessment, which I think everybody, my personal opinion is everybody should do it for themselves at the least, and then know yourself, know your strengths. I like how you said know your I say weaknesses, but you don't say weakness. You say limitations. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah, know your limitations. Yeah,
right.
Which sounds a lot better.
Well, a limitation might be a strength. Okay. All right. And it's a weakness. All of a sudden it's a weakness. I have to do something about it. I can't have any weaknesses. I mean, I need to educate myself. I need to say, well, sometimes it's near impossible for you to change your behavior or certain types of behavior. That's why I like to use the word limitations, because it does limit us. And it's okay sometimes. That's where we get into the concept that you were talking about. And that is surround people around you that have the strengths that you have limitations of.
I remember back in the day when I was first in real estate, I used to lead generate every morning, and I was so committed to that. And I would leave my office just to go to the bathroom, and people would see me in the hall and be like, "Hey, Dave, how's it going?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm doing great," and just keep walking. And people thought I was like a jerk because of it. And I just wanted to get back to my office and do my lead generation. And then I would be happy to talk to them later on.
Right.
And I didn't get it, and they didn't get it until we did the disc, and I started understanding myself more. And then I started understanding other people's behavior. So I just be like, "Hey man, awesome to see you. I'm lead generating now. Let's connect after 12. You know what I mean? Right. And it really makes a difference with people. So
if people want to take our assessment, all they have to do is email us at succeed@Abelson, ABELSON, like my name there. Make sure you spell it right. My family spells it the biblical way. So it's ABELSON.net. Make sure you do the .net. Right. And just do succeed@Abelson.net. And that's a contact, and email us or go to our website, Abelson.net or the AbelsonGroup.com, and go to contact us, and we'll be delighted to work with you, whether it's just for yourself or whether it's for huge organizations. This construction company I was talking about has 1,700 people in 15 different locations in 4 or 5 different states. So we work with large organizations as well as small organizations. So the size doesn't matter to us, because people are people, and we all need help in a lot of different ways.
Amazing. Well, listen, definitely go to succeed or you would email succeed@Abelson.net, and the website is Abelson.net, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and don't forget, mention Path to Mastery. So
yes, please do, and that way I'll let David know that. Hey, David, we had these half a dozen people contact us today because of you. So thank you for doing that.
Man, I'm excited. I found out we're at about 11,000 downloads a month right now, which is not too
Awesome.
bad,
Impressive.
So
Congrats.
yeah, I mean, it's not Joe Rogan yet. And by the way, if you know Joe Rogan, Joe Rogan is we got to get him on the podcast. So yeah. And all right, so everybody make sure you connect with Dr. Abelson. I mean, he's a rock star, and you really should do a disc. So at the least, you know yourself. I tell everybody do it. If you're going to hire somebody, you really need to do it for that person. I think you said in the beginning, people don't want to invest $100 or $120, whatever it is. But instead we end up wasting so much time because we hire the wrong person, and then we wasted all this time with them, and then they have to go back and start from scratch. So I would do yourself a favor and make sure disc yourself and then disc somebody else. So as we're wrapping, I normally ask people, Dr. Abelson, what does path to mastery mean? Well, I'll ask you that too. What does path to mastery mean? And then I've got a special question for you.
Well, for me, what it means is we all have this journey in life, and sometimes we shift gears. I mean, I'm actually in my third career. All right. But we all have a path to be masters, and hopefully your mastery of yourself first. And then you worry about mastering others. And for me, you have to look in the mirror every morning and say, I'm happy with what I see. The other aspect of it is if I did something and it was on the front page of the newspaper, would my mother be proud of me if she had the opportunity of reading that? So it's mastery of yourself and who you are and what makes things important to you.
Great filter. By the way, there's a link up at the top here on Clubhouse, or if you're listening to this on the podcast, you can always go to shift.pathtomastery.net. We do a webinar every Thursday on shifting, as we're in some uncertain times right now in the real estate market and the market in general. So feel free, go to shift.pathtomastery.net. You can join us for a webinar every Thursday at 3:00 Eastern time. It's about a 45-minute webinar, so feel free to join us. It's today at 3. You can click the link if you're in Clubhouse, or go to shift.pathtomastery.com. Join us on the webinar. Make sure you check out Dr. Abelson's site, which is abelson.net, and get yourself a disc. And final question, Dr. A.
Yes, sir.
We went in a lot of directions today. So I would say if somebody just chimed in right now and, putting all these pieces together, what do you want them to walk away with if they only listen to this last 30, 45 seconds?
It's important to understand yourself. And it doesn't have to be our assessment, our set of assessments, but get a set of assessments that you feel confident with and you believe are true and accurate, and do an assessment of yourself, read it, and then share with someone who you highly trust. All right. And see how accurate it is, and learn from what you hear, learn from what you read, and take some steps to maximize yourself.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.